I would also like to make a toast to the white man who steals our land and steals our sons.
To the white man.
Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland, 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 Dixieland.
All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to Dixieland of the Proletariat. We're going to talk about Southern working class history and current events through a leftist perspective. Make sure to like us on social media at Dixieland of the Proletariat or Dixie Prol. And if you want to give your wages to a bunch of rednecks, then subscribe to our Patreon page at patreon.com/DixieProl. Got a lot of cool stuff to give you, including CDs, stickers, and a cookbook. We also have a Spotify playlist with some great artists you also check out. The podcast is brought to you by Newport 100s in a Box, Camel Silver's Black Coffee, Box Wine, The Battle of Greasegrass, and Andrew Jackson Burning in Hell. Shout out to our new Patreon subscriber, Melissa. Our Patreon surplus goes to groups that are run by and or help marginalized people directly. As always, I'm Nelson.
I'm Comrade Kate.
I'm Brother William.
I'm Tommy.
I'm former pig farmer Tyler.
Tommy just straight up didn't even say it. He's like, fuck.
What am I supposed what? Oh, senior communications director, Tommy.
You have to commit to Nelson's commitment to nicknames, even though Nelson doesn't have one. I'm Nelson.
I'm not cool enough for a nickname.
I don't need a nickname because my parents named me Nelson.
Nelly?
That is the second episode in the fucking row you've just taken my life. And our guest this evening... And our guest this evening is Kiaza, who is going to give us a history of Mount Rushmore and Stone Mountain from an Indigenous perspective. She's all the way in the UK, and we want to say, hey, and how is everyone doing? Everyone unmute your mics, and let's say, hey. God, that was hard.
You made it weird. Everyone say, hey, we did it.
I'm the only one who's like at almost 4 o'clock in the morning over here, and everyone sounds less excited than me.
I mean, just to keep with theme from the last episode, I was just following orders.
Oh my God. All right, y'all. Well,
let's do some fucking learning.
Let's do some learning. Kiaza, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and kick it off and tell us what's up? And yeah.
You done now?
No. Okay, now.
Oh my God, I love you. You can stay. Like, if this just turns into another episode of everyone just like hard piss takes on Nelson, I am fucking here for it.
God.
I'm one of the early fans. I was here for all of the awkward growing pains up to this point. So, yeah, I guess that's what I'm here to do today. Sego, seguego, yankat Kiaza Piaroya, gangyageha ga, niwagahonsiata tanon nomina tanon ndi. Hello, everyone. My name is Kiaza Piaroya. I'm Mohawk, Comanche, and Apache. Thank you for having me. I always introduce myself in my grandmother's language because I believe in exposing people to indigenous language of North America. I list my people as a sign of respect and as a formal greeting, but also to show that I am not speaking for the other people that I'll be discussing today. As a fourth-generation Native educator and public speaker, and today I have been invited to speak about lands that are traditionally Muskogee, Salagi, and Lakota. I am none of these tribes, but I stand in solidarity with them, and I wish to bring their concerns to wider audiences without speaking over them. So that's the formal greeting. I guess we can start with Stone Mountain, since this is like a Southern thing. I have a lot of notes. Be prepared to like just sit and deal with it.
That's my favorite way to record this show. I can just sit here and listen to you and then come out smart. I muted myself and come out smarter on the other side of it. Like, thank you.
People were like, oh yeah, you should write something. I end up writing 14 pages. So good luck with that. So there we go. Okay. So I'll start with human habitation of Stone Mountain and its surroundings date back into prehistory. Evidence of numerous tribes, including mound builders, have been found in the area of the mountain, and archaeological evidence indicates that early archaic Indians were the first humans to visit Stone Mountain about 9,000 years ago. At least that's what archaeologists like to say. Indigenous people have been in Florida for at least 14,000 years, and it's absurd to think that nobody would have noticed this great honking piece of rock for like 5,000 years while they were passing by it. So what you must understand is that a lot of indigenous knowledge comes from oral tradition, and it's an act of indigenizing colonized spaces to learn from oral histories and to trust them. But I digress. Beyond that, there's evidence of Middle Archaic mound builders in the area and a stone ring around the summit, which existed all the way up into the 1800s. Though by the time Europeans thought to ask the local indigenous people about it, they had mostly lost the knowledge to history. That's because the Muskogee and the Tsalagi, who lived in Georgia by the 1700s, had migrated there after the collapse of the pre-colonization Lamar culture. The last known major settlement around Stone Mountain itself was dated to around 800 to 1000 CE. There's evidence that European diseases began affecting coastal populations as early as 1500 AD, and Native American traders carried the microbes northward from Cuba and then into the lowlands near the Atlantic Ocean and Gulf Coast. Shortly after the Hernando de Soto expedition passed through Georgia in 1540, waves of European diseases began to decimate the Native American population. De Soto probably passed through or near Macon, Georgia in March of 1540. The indigenous people of DeKalb County would have been exposed to deadly pathogens at least by the summer of 1540. Anthropologists currently believe that indigenous population of Georgia dropped around 95% between 1500 and 1700 AD. Up until the end of the American Revolution, British and French maps showed the Catawba occupying the region between metropolitan Atlanta and the Nacoochee Valley in northeast Georgia. The Siouans were probably pushed out of the major river valleys by Muskogean immigrants. That's a common theme that happens. People that live in the areas of the United States that you think of now are usually immigrants coming from other areas in the country because of internalized land struggles. It's not that we never fought, it's that we never fought Europeans before. So the Muskogee are not the only inhabitants of DeKalb County. The Cherokee, or the Tsalagi in their own language, moved from Tennessee and North Carolina sometime after European contact. Europeans first learned of the mountain in 1567 when Spanish explorers were told of a mountain farther inland, which is very high, shining like the sun set on fire. When Stone Mountain, then called Lone Mountain by the Creek, in English at least, was first encountered by European explorers, its summit was encircled by a rock wall similar to that can still be found in Georgia's Fort Mountain. The wall is believed to have been built by early Native American inhabitants of the area, although its purpose remains unclear. By the beginning of the 20th century, the wall had disappeared, the rocks having been taken away by early visitors as souvenirs, rolled down the rock face, or removed by the commercial quarrying operation. The mountain was the eastern end of the Campbellton Trail, and a Native American path that ran through the now Atlanta area. Disease followed these Europeans to central Georgia, killing thousands of Native Americans. In response to that threat posed by the whites, surviving indigenous tribes made alliances with one another during the late 18th century. These alliances became known as the Creek Confederation. Although Stone Mountain lay between the Creek Confederation and the Cherokee, it became an important meeting place because the two major trails connected it to the eastern part of the state. This is a lot of dry, very early information. So it happens when you talk about colonization, honestly.
Kiaza, just real quick, is this a thing because of Zoom? Can you just push your microphone back just a tiny bit more?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Now that we have some context for indigenous history of Georgia, let's move on to the era of rapid colonization and the beginning of the treaties with the US. There are three treaties that are important to the formation of Georgia as it is today. Those three treaties being how the Cherokee and the Creek ceded the land or had it forcibly taken. The first of these treaties was the Treaty of New York, 1790. And although this sounds like you're in like a high school history class, honestly, this is what indigenous people who are in the realm of decolonization, this is what we have to do. We have to find these ourselves and learn the treaty history, because if there's nobody enforcing it, then there's no reason for the American government, or even in some cases the Canadian government, to enforce it themselves. So just suffer through it, okay, because I had to. The Treaty of New York was signed in 1790 between the leaders of the Creek people and Henry Knox, the then Secretary of War for the United States. A failed attempt between the United States and the Creek Indians at Rock Landing, Georgia in 1789 was abruptly ended by Creek leader Alexander McGill. This is what happens when we get white names. Alexander McGillivray. He described his grievances in a letter to the United States commissioners. Washington sent a special emissary, Colonel Maurinius Willett, to McGillivray, persuading him to come to New York City with then the capital of the United States, to conduct a treaty with Washington and Henry Knox directly. Willett met the Creek leader at the summit of Stone Mountain, furthering its use as an important meeting and ceremonial site. In the summer of 1790, 27 Creek leaders, led by Alexander McGillivray, traveled to New York and signed a treaty on behalf of the Upper, Middle, and Lower Creek and Seminole, composing the Creek Nation of Indians. McGillivray was the only one who could sign his name. The Creek leaders ceded a significant portion of their hunting grounds, including land stretching to the Oconee River, for a trade agreement with the new American country. On to the second treaty, which is the Treaty of Indian Springs, 1821. The Treaty of Indian Springs opened a large swath of Georgia for settlement by European Americans on former Creek Indian land, including present-day Stone Mountain Village. In 1822, the area that now makes up the city was part of a newly formed DeKalb County. Under the terms of the treaty, the Muskogee ceded their territory east of the Flint River, some 4 million acres, to Georgia. In exchange, the United States government agreed to pay the Muskogee some $200,000 over 14 years, including a first installment of $50,000 to be paid to pay for Georgia citizens' claims against the Creek Nation. This is all in a run-up to the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which is what most people understand as the beginning of the Cherokee Trail of Tears, although it was far more than the Cherokee who were involved in that. The European population in western and north central Georgia before 1821 was primarily composed of people whose families had intermarried with the Creeks. Any person whose mother was Creek was automatically a Creek citizen in the Creek Confederacy, if they so desired. Creek women owned all the land and domestic buildings, which is another thing that my people have in common with them. It's the women who are in charge of these kinds of things, and we're the ones that can shoo them out. A Creek woman married to a European or African man could bring her family to live on any unoccupied location within the Creek Nation. Until the Bureau of Indian Affairs got involved with tribal government, the Creeks did not link race with tribal citizenship. Any family of any race could be invited to become citizens as long as its members ascribed to the Creek monotheistic religion and the laws of the National Council. Southeastern planters, however, were greedy for more land. Politicians focused their energies and money on a few Creek leaders in West Georgia, headed by William McIntosh, who happened to also be the first cousin of Governor Troup. In 1825, Troup, McIntosh, and some white real estate speculators set up a partnership. Troup and McIntosh arranged a treaty conference at McIntosh's new Indian Springs Hotel, which was on the land he had negotiated at the 1821 treaty. Basically, don't ever trust somebody who writes in their own stuff into a treaty at this point. The elected leadership of the Creek Nation was not invited. McIntosh, his sons, his son-in-laws, and some of his Creek buddies were paid large sums of money to sign a treaty with Georgia that sold all Creek lands in the state for a cheap price. Their signers reserved square mile reserves for themselves that were then sold to the real estate investment partnership. They did not reserve the Ocmulgee Bottoms, which has been promised to the Creeks for eternity. The federal government ruled that the 1825 Treaty of Indian Springs was fraudulent. By this time, West Georgia had been overrun by squatters, so the Creek National Council had no hope of retaining any of their territory. A new treaty with more favorable terms was negotiated that included the Creek's permanent ownership of the 6 square mile Okmulgee Reserve. However, by this time, it had been gobbled up by politically powerful real estate speculators. Technically, the Muskogee Creek Nation still owns all of Macon, Georgia, southwest of the Okmulgee River. That tract includes the Macon Coliseum, Okmulgee National Monument, the regional airport, and the Georgia Music Hall of Fame. Now, if that sounds familiar, that also has a tie-in with a very recent court case that Indian country blew up about, where basically half of Oklahoma was deemed to be still Indian lands. When they did that, I mean, that's what I mean when people like me have to learn about these treaties, or else nobody's going to enforce them. So there's a lot of minor stuff which I'd be willing to get to later while I'm not trying to think of all of this information right now, which basically means that, yes, it's Indian land, and if anybody could enforce the 1825 Treaty of Indian Springs, the Creek would stand to gain quite a lot of land and a lot of important money sinks in Georgia. So between 1790 and 1830, the population of Georgia increased sixfold. The western push of the settlers created a problem. Georgians continued to take American Indian lands and force both the Cherokee Indians and the Creek Indians into the frontier. By 1825, the Lower Creek had been completely removed from that side of the state that was set up by the provisions of the Treaty of Indian Springs. By 1827, the Creeks were all the way out of Georgia. Georgia is also home of the story of some of the Tsalagi, or the Cherokee. However, in 1829, the Georgia Gold Rush started, pushing them out of North Georgia's mountains. The Cherokee, like the Muskogee, had adopted many of the ways of the colonizers. More Gold Rush stories are going to come later. So in 1826, the Georgia legislature asked President John Quincy Adams to negotiate a removal treaty of the Cherokee. Adams, a supporter of Indian sovereignty, initially refused, but when Georgia threatened to nullify the current treaty, he approached the Cherokee to negotiate. A year passed without any progress towards removal. Andrew Jackson, a Democrat and supporter of Indian removal, was elected president in 1828, which is the beginning of the end. Shortly after the 1828 election, Georgia acted on its nullification threat. The legislature passed a series of laws abolishing the independent government of the Cherokee and extending state law over their territory. Cherokee officials were forbidden to meet for legislative purposes. White people, including missionaries and those married to the Cherokee, were forbidden to live in Cherokee country without a state permit. And Cherokee were forbidden to testify in court cases involving European Americans. These restrictions are pretty par for the course when it comes to treatment of Indigenous people in treaties. White supremacy is written into the laws under the guise of equal separation, and is that disenfranchisement, which means that it is much harder for them to contest these things in what the colonizers made their courts. So the colonizers made the courts and then made us unable to do anything about it by effectively excluding us. The Cherokee were forbidden to dig for gold, and Georgia authorized a survey of their lands to prepare a lottery to distribute the land to whites. The state held a lottery in 1832. In the following session, the state legislature stripped the Cherokee of all their land other than their residences and adjoining improvements. In 1834, this exception was also removed. When state judges intervened on behalf of the Cherokee residents, they were harassed and denied jurisdiction over such cases. So that all leads us right into the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the so-called Trail of Tears. Obviously, because I've been talking about the Cherokee, that's what fits into it the most. So we're going to start with them again. The Cherokee attempted to fight removal legally by challenging the removal laws in the Supreme Court and by establishing an independent Cherokee nation. At first, the court seemed to rule against the Indians. In Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the court refused to hear the case extending Georgia's laws on the Cherokee because they did not represent a sovereign nation. In 1832, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Cherokee on the same issue in Worcester versus Georgia. In this case, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the Cherokee Nation was sovereign, making the removal laws invalid. The Cherokee would have to agree to removal in a treaty. The treaty turned out to be the Treaty of Nuakota in 1836. Another one. And the common thing that you hear from a lot of Indigenous people like myself when we talk about these things is that every treaty was broken. Every single one of these ended up broken. So it's really not helpful. You learn these things and then it was broken, and then so how are you supposed to fight against them after that? Anyway, most supported Principal Chief John Ross of the Cherokee, who fought the encroachment of whites starting with the 1832 land lottery. However, a minority, less than 500 out of 17,000 Cherokee in North Georgia, followed Major Ridge, his son John, and Elias, who advocated removal. The Treaty of Nuakota, signed by Ridge and members of the Treaty Party. It was because of those 500 people that followed him that basically set the precedent for removal to begin at that point. This marked the end of the rights of Indigenous people as sovereign nations in Georgia and began the Trail of Tears, where approximately a quarter of the Cherokee population perished. Approximately 30 years later, about a third of the Creeks who had moved to Oklahoma previously, after ceding their land, died in the Civil War, and not through fighting. The casualties were the vulnerable children, women, and elders who were imprisoned in Union concentration camps in Kansas after being starved to death. So it's not really just the Confederacy, it was also the Union. We don't really like any of y'all, really. So why am I talking about...
Yeah, we all suck. Oh, God.
Shall I go on?
Yes.
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Keep going, please.
So why am I talking?
I'm just scribbling notes and questions and just
Thank you for taking notes. God.
No, I'm resident nerd on that. Absolutely.
I did have one question though.
Yes.
Like, on what grounds did they what was the reason behind banning them for mining gold? Just out of curiosity and ignorance.
So they effectively confined them to their residences, because that was the first part of the treaty, is that it confined them to their residences, so they couldn't own any land that wasn't adjoining their residence, which is basically like saying you can't own anything outside your front door, so how can you mine on something that you don't own? And then how can you fight that if you can't go to court?
Yeah, that's mighty white.
You don't got to tell me.
Yeah.
Okay, so why am I talking about all of this colonial and treaty history? These treaties are acts. These treaties and acts are the hidden history of settler colonialism and white supremacy that exists in Stone Mountain before the sculpture is blasted into its side and the park was foisted onto it. This is a history that's largely erased, and I can attest to how hard it is to find information about the people around Stone Mountain. Partially due to the rapid expansion of colonial settlements into Georgia in the 17 and 1800s, partially due to a general disinterest in Indigenous history and pop culture previous to around the 1960s, and partially due to the intentional sabotaging of archaeological evidence in a market that values new homes and businesses more than historical evidence. Archaeologists in Georgia and across the Southeast are working at a deficit. The civilizations of the Southeast were some of the first destroyed by Eurasian diseases before the conquistadors even had a chance to meet them personally. The historical record between first contact and later colonization in the 1600s is spotty at best and empty at worst. Often it is cited that the Muskogee and the Tsalagi willingly took up European customs and thought it somehow absolves the settlers of their violence towards them. Like any violent crime, it is the choice of the perpetrator to commit it and not the fault of the victim. Blaming the Muskogee and the Tsalagi for their own colonization is a despicable thing to do. Even when they donned the customs of the white supremacists, they were eventually sold out because white supremacy only exists to further itself like any parasite. Eventually, the dissuading they did by taking on their customs gave way to the colonizers' thirst for land and power. So speaking of white supremacy, let's get into the history of the KKK and Stone Mountain in the 20th century.
Woo! The second clan.
Don't cheer for that. Don't. Why would you do that? There you go. We don't.
I literally
cheer
I wrote that
plan.
before you even said it. Like I wrote it down. I was like, wait a minute. This is where that WASP minister like totally started.
You wrote the cheer in?
No, I didn't write the fucking cheer in. I wrote down
like,
before we even got to like I was like going to mention like I was like, wait, didn't that like Protestant minister like start the second clan on top of the mountain?
That's
sure,
exactly
that's
what
your
happened.
note. I think that your actual note is just a sticky note on your monitor that just says, remember to cheer if someone brings up the KKK.
Fuck.
That's it. I'm leaving.
Life is
Y'all have notes?
confusing and
Yeah,
weird.
see, joke's on you.
Tyler's like, y'all have notes.
Joke's on you. Nelson doesn't need a note.
It's
What's to be inappropriate?
It's involuntary. It's like Pavlovian response. If you say KKK, he cheers.
Yeah,
But he starts
it's-
salivating afterwards.
Just like
I'm not trying to-
any bald white dude with a beard in Alabama just starts salivating at the thought of the Klan, just foaming at the mouth, racist back.
I'm not trying to get too deep into it, but Nelson is Italian. They created fascism.
True fact.
Yeah.
All right.
That was one of the clips we were gonna do from the Sopranos and intros. The intro was the Indigenous woman yells out.
Fuck's sake. Let the fucking Sopranos thing go.
Never.
Nelson,
Oh
stop
God.
right now
No.
and pronounce it correctly.
Sopranos.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ugh.
If I am going to start reclaiming my own language, I'm going to kick you every time you don't do yours.
Sopranos.
Or we could just,
What were you
know,
speaking?
can we put Sopranos in like the same box that we finally put that other podcast that we don't talk about anymore and just stop fucking talking about it?
Nope.
Anyway,
Are we
guys,
talking Chapo? Because fuck Chapo.
I don't know who asked, but I was speaking Ganyakehaga or Mohawk.
Oh, right on.
Yeah,
That
that's
would be
my
Will.
grandmother's side.
Hell yeah.
Super fascinated by the stone mountain circle at the top at the summit. I've never heard that before. I bet that was gorgeous. And
Right.
super curious
So-
about whether or not that's a defensive or a religious thing.
So that's the problem, is that because once Europeans started finding out about it, they just kind of took it, which happens a lot. Like that's why you can't get close to like Stonehenge or anything like here in the UK. They didn't think about it that far ahead for Stone Mountain. I have an uncle who worked at the powwow that's happened there every year until this year. And he said that it was part of a medicine wheel. And like I said at the beginning, this is all based on oral tradition. So there's nobody who wrote down, oh, it's part of a medicine wheel, and this is what a medicine wheel does. It's just what he heard from somebody who probably heard it from somebody else for generations and generations. That could mean that if it's a medicine wheel, the medicine wheel is really kind of a plains thing, but it's not like it only existed on the plains. And because people moved positions so much in the United States previous to that, it could have traveled with them from the plains, but that would basically mean it's a ceremonial place, which is exactly what people did afterwards. They started using it as a ceremonial place. That's where people met to do treaties, and apparently that's where the KKK also decided to do ceremonies, because it is just a large plinth at the end of the day. It's an important spot. So that's the entire point of me coming up with all of this, is because there is an indigenous history to the area before the KKK, before the Georgia Gold Rush and all that. And it ties in because it's kind of human nature to see this as an important place, but nobody knows about it. And it's so hard to find out about. I spent days trying to come up with this information because everything was wiped away. So yeah, anyway, back onto the KKK. What?
I was just saying, Kate brought up a good point because there's a lot to talk about. Do you want to? We can make this a two-parter if you want.
I have so many questions
Yeah, I
on
think
just this
there's a lot.
portion. Yeah, no,
Well,
And we want you back on.
And this is also, it's important stories that
Yeah.
that need to be told. And I'm sure like a lot of our listeners, this is, through no fault of their own, the first time they're actually being exposed to like
It's a lot of
an
information in one time.
Yeah. But it's also like, it's an opportunity to like actually hear it, properly and respectfully and effectively. Like,
I mean, if I'm being-
yeah. Go ahead.
If we're being
Sorry.
honest, like this is what we started on. Like this is where we got our start. I think this does deserve a 2-part.
Yeah.
Because this.
I mean, I can completely make the Rushmore part
Yeah.
like another one.
That's what we're
Yeah,
thinking,
like
yeah.
I would love to, if you're up for it, like would you be willing to come back so that we can devote we can devote real thorough attention to all of this?
I don't do anything. I'm still in quarantine. I can just do this.
Yay.
Okay, we'll work out rescheduling and then at the end. Okay, talk to us about these goddamn Klansmen.
Right.
Yeah.
That Nelson.
I can't
that's
see
2
nothing
times
out of
you
this
cheered for the
mask.
Klan. That's 2 times you cheered for the Klan, Nelson. I'm not keeping score, but I'm keeping score.
Jesus Christ.
Thank you, Tyler.
There's going to be a tally board. I'm going to make a tally board. It's going to go right there. Every time you cheer the Klan, it's going to go up.
There are good people on both sides, okay? Just,
It's true. Tommy said it, so it must be true.
We're never going to get to the actual Klan part of the story because Nelson can't control himself.
All right,
Do the Klan.
How the fuck
the
am I
Klan gets you
misbehaved?
so wet. You just
I got the vapors. I do
got
the
the
Klan.
too much Klan.
Oh,
news.
Lord.
Tyler, to be fair, you're also like way smarter than the rest of us. So like, it's
That is not true.
okay.
Basically.
Sure. All right, everyone who's not named Kiaza, mute yourselves.
Okay, I guess we're going back onto this. All right. So we're gonna go on to the common history that most people know about Stone Mountain. Stone Mountain depicts 3 Confederate generals of the Civil War: President Jefferson Davis and Generals Robert E. Lee and Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson on their favorite horses. It was the sacred site to members of the 2nd and 3rd National Clans. On November 25th of 1915, after being emboldened by D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, a small group, including 15 robed and hooded charter members, quote unquote, of the new organization, met at the summit of Stone Mountain to create a new iteration of the Klan. They were led by William J. Simmons and included 2 elderly members of the original Klan. It's a party. As part of their ceremony, they set up on the summit an altar covered with a flag, opened a Bible, and burned a 16-foot cross. Stone Mountain was the location of the annual Labor Day cross burning ceremony for the next 50 years, only ending when the state condemned the property. 50 years of cross burnings on top of this site.
That's a hell of a way to subvert Labor Day.
All right. So Sam Venable, who bought the mountain in 1887, back when you could buy a mountain, deeded the north face of the mountain to the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1916 on condition that they would complete a sizable Civil War monument in 12 years. Finances as well as technical problems slowed progress. The U.S. Mint issued a 1925 commemorative silver dollar bearing the word Stone Mountain as a fundraiser for the monument. That's the U.S. Mint, everybody. The project was greatly advanced by Mrs. C. Helen Plain, a charter member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, or the UDC, and the first president and honorary life president of the Georgia State Division. She chose the sculptor. She chose the sculptor Gutzon Borglum for the project. Borglum's original plan was spectacular. 5 groups of figures, 65 mounted officers representing the states to be chosen by the states, General Nathan Bedford Forrest and his cavalry, some 700 to 1,000 figures, each from 35 feet to 50 feet tall, all across the side of this mountain.
So they were like straight up going to build like a terracotta Confederate army type of thing of just like, we're going to make a model of every fucking soldier.
They're just going to just blast it into the side of it. I mean, if you've ever seen the actual thing that's there, it's so tiny and gross.
It's
really
weird. It's like, no, it's so weird because it's visually, it's a blemish. It comes across as if like, because Stone Mountain it isn't really that big, but it's big in the context of it's in the middle of a plane. So it stands up and stands out, and it's so awkward. So it reminds me of like when you have a zit that nobody else notices, but you know it's there, so you keep picking at it, and then you make yourself a little scab crater that everyone's like, what is that on your face? Like, that's what the monument looks like. It's a fucking
So I got a question.
It's like a tacky little poster.
So this lady declared herself like president of this for life.
It says honorary president of the United Daughters of the Confederacy. So I'm pretty sure that everyone is like, oh my God, you were the greatest one that we had. So you're going to be the president for life.
See, when I hear president for life, the only person that comes to mind is Idi Amin. So
that's generally not a good thing to be compared to.
I may wear the uniform of a general, but I am a simple man. I love The Last King of Scotland. It's great.
No, I went to a totally different person with like a bizarre affiliation with kilts, because the first thing that popped into my head was like all of Prince Charles's weird honorary degrees, because he likes to bring them up, and then everyone's just like, but it's an honorary degree, and he's like, a degree nonetheless.
Don't forget, the Crown Prince of England is also a farmer now. So
definitely.
Last pointless thing I gotta say. Blaze Foley, a country artist, has a really good song about Idi Amin called "Springtime in Uganda." Everyone should go listen to it.
Is that a take on like Springtime for Hitler?
Springtime for Hitler.
All right, so now we're cheering Hitler and the Klan.
Winter.
I am Uganda.
Friends.
You invited me here for this.
U-boats are sailing once more.
Anyway, you stayed up so late. We should
Springtime in Uganda.
Wait, what, Tyler?
Springtime in Uganda by Blaze Foley. Look it up. Listen to it. It's a great. It's hilarious.
So they say you devour your enemies. If my enemy is a chicken, oh God!
Oh
watch The Last King of Scotland. It's a great movie.
Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Well, we got as far as Gutzon Borglum, who was chosen for the project initially by Mrs. C. Helen Payne, the honorary life president of the Georgia State Division of the Daughters of the Confederacy. Okay, that was his original plan. In case you need any confirmation that this was all for the benefit of the KKK, in October 1923, Venable granted the Klan easement with perpetual right to hold celebrations as they desired. The UDC established the Stone Mountain Confederate Memorial Association for fundraising and on-site supervision of the project. Venable and Borglum, who were both closely associated with the Klan, arranged to pack the Stone Mountain Confederate Memorial Association with Klan members. Why can't they just shorten that? Whatever.
Yeah, they should just abbreviate that to Indiana State Legislature and call it a day.
Ooh, zing! Okay, so financial conflicts between Borglum and the association led to his firing in 1925. That's 2 years. 2 years later. He destroyed his models, claiming that they were his property, but the association disagreed and had a warrant issued for his arrest. He was warned of the arrest and narrowly escaped to North Carolina, whose governor, Angus McLean, refused to extradite him. The face of Lee that Borglum had partially completed was blasted off the mountain in 1928. So this is all internal politics. He was gonna get arrested.
So there is a history of blasting the shit off the mountain, though.
I mean, yeah, we can still do that now.
There's precedence.
Yeah, and then they hired a Jewish guy, which is weird.
They had several artists. Yeah, they had. I think they had 3 or 4 over time.
Mm-hmm.
Borglum was specifically part of the KKK. Like specifically, people are like, "Oh, he was associated." No, he was in it. He just couldn't say it. So, because some people, I guess, tried to hide it back then. So next, Augustus Lukeman agreed to take on the project in 1925, but lack of funding and eventual arrival of World War II halted work.
That's the Jewish
one
guy. Yeah, he's Jewish. Yeah,
he was basically the head of it when nothing happened. He was like, "Oh yeah, I'm here for this," and then the war. So during his time, he changed the design to be smaller. That design was later taken up by Walter Hancock in 1963. After the state of Georgia purchased Stone Mountain in 1960. The state condemned the site, which voided Venable's easement to the KKK. So you remember their cross burnings on Labor Day every year? That's the only reason it stopped, is because Georgia condemned the site for them being able to go to the top.
What year was that again?
They bought it in 1960, and Hancock took over as the artist in 63.
Okay. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. You gotta love that, like,
the dates are going to get much better in a second.
Oh my God. I just love that, like, we're like well past Brown v. Board, and they're still just like, yeah, you can climb this mountain to burn crosses. That's totally chill. Oh, fucking goddamn it.
Yeah, it just finished like in the 80s or something, 70s?
Yeah, I'm about to get to that. Stone Mountain Park officially opened April 14th, 1965, which is exactly 100 years to the day after Lincoln's assassination. That's what I mean. The dates get so much better. They decide to open the Confederate monument.
That's not a fucking accident. That's never a fucking accident.
Nope, they did that shit on purpose.
That's like having a rally on the anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting, but like, it's fine.
Or what's his face, Alabama state rep that today was like giving a speech about on the birthday of Nathan Bedford Forrest, praising the Confederacy.
Oh my God!
John Lewis, his body is in Montgomery, laying in rest, and it's just like, what the fuck.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, he posted like a picture of himself like in front of like the Stars and Bars and the Southern Cross and the Bonnie Blue flag, just being like, so glad I could give the convocation at the celebration of Forrest's birthday. Yeehaw, motherfuckers. And it was like concurrent with the, like, while he was doing that was like the moment that Representative Lewis's body was crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Fuck this shit.
We're taking Yeehaw back though. We're taking Yeehaw back.
I was going to say, I love pretending that the Bonnie Blue flag is Somalia and asking people about it whenever I see it. Like, oh, you're Somali? No.
Oh. Well, as for the dates, the carving was finally completed on March 3rd, 1972. So they first started talking about making the carving, and they were granted their original easement to the United Daughters of the Confederacy in 1914, and they finished in 1972. Took quite a long time. They could have stopped at any point, but I guess we're going to keep going with this. So my last point is to talk about Gutzon Borglum in totality, because he was the first sculptor who was picked, and this will apparently tie into my next episode when I talk about Mount Rushmore.
A very famous sculptor, isn't he?
Oh yeah. So even though we discussed Gutzon Borglum before, and in the end, not entirely responsible for the sculpture, it's important that I tie him into the story. Borglum was one of the 6 knights who sat on the Imperial Concilium in 1923, which transferred leadership of the Ku Klux Klan from Imperial Wizard Colonel Simmons to Imperial Wizard Hiram Evans, though he denied it later. Other members painted his denial as made for quote-unquote public consumption. As I said, some people tried to hide it. So he was in the KKK. He wasn't just associated with it, he was in it. So why do I bring that up with this artist? Well, that's because his next project was, after being dismissed from Stone Mountain, was the 4 presidential heads of Mount Rushmore. And I guess that's going to take us to the next time I'm back. So we have this KKK sculptor who ended up getting kicked off the project anyway. Just go right on to Mount Rushmore and everything's chill there, right?
Jesus fucking Christ.
We were talking about how Stone Mountain looks so weird with the tiny statue. And recently, I've been seeing the picture going around Twitter where it's Mount Rushmore zoomed out, and it shows you like how awful it looks. They didn't even clean up the debris. Someone said they have no ears because white people don't listen anymore.
I shared that meme, thanks.
Yeah, I think I shared that on the page. That was fucking great.
Yeah, it's really it's like small compared to the size of the bluff is really quite large.
The rest of it is magnificent, and then the sculpted part just looks like dog shit. I mean, and they can try to church it up by narrowing the shot or whatever, but it's really unappealing.
I think that's why they have like that one viewing platform, so you only get this one view with the trees, with everything right there in front of you. But it's a gigantic piece of land that it's on. It's just this tiny little like scribbles in it.
I remember when I saw it in person, I was like, "This is it. This fucking sucks." Like,
Yeah.
But whenever you see it in media, it's only, they highlight the faces or whatever. I mean, I always had the impression as a kid that the faces were way bigger than they were.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know. Now going back and looking at these pictures, it's sort of like, it does look just awful.
it looks god awful. In person, it was just like, what the fuck? This is stupid.
You've been there?
Yeah, I went there. And I was just like, God, this fucking sucks. Like, this
When you were
dumb.
burning crosses, yeah, you.
Yeah. We took a clan retreat to Mount Rushmore.
I do want to make
half of them didn't know what Mount Rushmore was, and I had to educate everybody.
God.
I do want to make a side note about Borglum. He also did a sculpture for Catholic Church in New York, I think. Yeah.
I don't
He
doubt
did
it.
a lot of work. So I ended up looking him
He
up.
was
and
like the guy at the time. Like,
Yeah.
if you needed a sculpture commissioned, like he was the dude.
Yeah, just hire
Yeah.
a Klansman. They'll get it done.
Hire Klansmen to get it done.
He did. I had to message resident Italian guy Nelson to tell him that I looked up his works and he'd done a commemoration of Sacco and Vanzetti, who he keeps talking about.
Okay, that's so
That's so weird.
I mean, I guess that's partially the nature of commission work is it's when that's your livelihood.
That one he took it on himself to do that one.
He was just I'm gonna
Sacco and Vanzetti.
some anarchists, even though I'm a fucking Klansman.
It's really bizarre. Well, so Borglum himself is really
What a complicated man.
Honestly. So when you look at his particular brand of white supremacy, he comes from what I believe is a Danish family. And so he was part of the very Aryan style of that. So very,
Nordic.
yeah, that kind of white supremacy. Not so much everybody who's from Europe will turn white or will kill them. It's just Nordic. So sometimes when you come across people like that, they have this they kind of have this break where it's oh well, I can still like them, I can still make art of them. For years nobody would display it. He tried to give it to the Boston Library, and they wouldn't take it.
When we finally get our fucking Columbus statue taken down, I would be happy to take that and replace it.
Really, a Borglum one?
But I would, if we're gonna take down, one Italian fucking statue and replace it with another, I'll take the Sacco and Vanzetti one.
There's so many artists that you can talk to. So many starving artists in these days. You can get anybody.
To be honest, though, so it's a real. So I want to talk about this because we're in this moment of part of BLM is solidarity with Indigenous populations. And so in taking down Confederate statues, there is a unifying front about also removing statues that celebrate colonialism and colonization. And so you've seen Columbus coming down, we've seen it happening in the UK as well. And so it's there is that conversation, well, what should we put up to replace it? And I'm of the personal opinion that we should stop fucking building statues of people and we should stop deifying human beings in general. I think that's a weird and fucked up thing to do. And so, but it's in that conversation, there's, a lot of, well, what do we do about Mount Rushmore and Stone Mountain? And I'm of the opinion the right answer is give them back, let Indigenous peoples decide their fate and then accept whatever that decision is and, take my lily white ass the fuck out of the conversation. But so when I have that conversation with people, it seems like the hang up has to do a lot with the concept of rematriation, the concept of giving land back, because property ownership is such a European concept. And Americans having grown, contemporary, United States citizens having grown up in what is essentially a recreation of European culture, none of us have ever experienced anything or been taught anything outside of that particular concept. So it's how do we start addressing a different idea of what land access and rights to land and chipping away at the concept of ownership? Where do we start with that to recontextualize it for people?
the first thing I'll say is that you actually have grown up with some idea of that. This is some things that I'll get into like next time I'm on this, because I have more about it there. But because you're asking now, you have grown up with some idea of it because there's the national park system in the United States. And there is some idea of collectivized land access, that this is somehow public land. It belongs to everybody. The care of it is everybody's responsibility. The issue is that Americans are really bad at that. Like, they're bad at making sure that money gets to it. They're bad at making sure that they're treating it with respect. They're bad at really thinking of the land as not only what you can do with it, but to be there for the future generations. There is an issue when it comes to the national park system because it was built on indigenous land theft. That's basically how you got these quote unquote pristine landscapes to be the national park system. As I said, I'm going to be getting into that more next time. But I mean, there is a kind of precedent for that the United States has an idea of collectivized land. Really, what you need to start with is the idea that it's not about belonging to you. It's not about what you are able to do to it, what you are allowed to do in these spaces. It's more about there's an idea of 7 generations, especially that usually comes from the Lakota side, but without getting too pan-Indigenous, it's a good thing to think about. So you think about 7 generations that came before you and 7 generations that will come after you. And your actions are dictated by who came before you and what you're going to do for the people that come after you. It's an idea that comes up a lot in European philosophy. Unfortunately, nobody listens to philosophy anymore either. So that's...
Whatever. I fall asleep to philosophize this every night because it is so dry.
You're a special case.
puts me right to sleep every night.
Like, honestly, listening to white philosophers is like so tiring, but I'll listen to indigenous ones every once in a while, because it's not so much based as like, oh, this is a school of thought. It's rather like, this is how I survive and I'm going to talk about it. That's basically it. So when it comes to things like changing where these statues are, who ends up owning it at the end of the day, when it comes to what the statue was originally put there for, so a lot of times if it's a Confederate statue, the Confederacy was built upon subjugation of Black people. So really that should be for Black people to take over. If there's ever going to be any kind of figuring out what to do with them, there's that. You have the idea of taking away the statues whatsoever, although I do kind of enjoy just having art when you're walking around. Oh, you can see this thing. And I really enjoy seeing statues of indigenous people when I'm out. I know exactly where they are back in my hometown in Florida because they're so rare to see an indigenous person there. So you might be, or maybe not so much you, but kind of white culture can be kind of like, oh, well, we can just get rid of this and it's no big deal then. But there is a point to representation. There is a point to seeing somebody who looks like me, somebody who looks like my family in the context of the area that we live in. We still live in these cities. We still live in these areas. So I would rather have, an indigenous leader put up there, statues of, a lot of times in like the Southeast, like especially in Florida, because the cultures that were there are now considered culturally extinct. Nobody thinks of them. Nobody thinks of what they looked like. Nobody thinks of how they lived on the land. So if there was a statue of, say, the Hororo, who were from Central Florida, right where I lived, that would be an incredible thing to see because nobody's acknowledged them before. They're barely even in any of the missionaries' writing. So that it's kind of in this context of larger representation. If you think of, off the top of my head, because I'm really schooled in this stuff, like Disney. When it comes to Disney, there's one Native American that you think of. Maybe 2 if you watch this one movie that didn't make any money. But there's one Native American that you think of, and that movie, Pocahontas, came out at exactly my time period. It came out in 1995 when I was turning 7 years old. That should have been my princess. That should have been my key to having representation in the wider pop culture. Instead, it turned into a fucking chain around my neck for the rest of my life. So having representation there, having representation be a lot wider, having representation being having the engine behind it be the people who want to be represented.
That makes perfect sense. That makes perfect. Like because it's like, how different would that movie have been as well if it had been created by Indigenous people instead of a white marketing team for profit? Like,
it literally would have been a horror movie.
Horror movie.
Can I throw my hat in the ring on, like, if we're going to build statues, personally, I would like to see Fidel Castro playing basketball. I would like to see Malcolm X with the AK-47. I would like to see Pancho Villa. And I would love to see fucking Outcast where the three Confederate fucks are on Stone Mountain.
That's very sweet, but that's why nobody's asking you.
And also, they need to finish the fucking Crazy Horse Monument.
No, they don't.
You don't think
they don't? No. So I'm not going to go off. Calm down. If I'm going to go off, I'm going to wake up everybody in the house.
Go off. Educate me.
Go off clean.
I'm an ignorant, privileged white guy, and I need these things. I need to be schooled on these things.
So you're like halfway there when it comes to it, because a lot of people don't even know that the Crazy Horse statue is going up. But again, this is what I'm going to be talking about next time. But since we're addressing it now, the bluff is actually called Six Grandfathers in English. I have it written down somewhere how to say it in Lakota. I don't know how to pronounce Lakota. It's going to be terrible next time. But Six Grandfathers is a very large bluff. It's part of the Black Hills Range that's in South Dakota and Dakota. It's part of a range that's
the
up
lower
there.
One.
Thank you, South Dakota. I'm from Florida. We don't really care about places out there. Anyway, those places were ceremonial to begin with. When a wildfire came through that area, I think it was in 2016 or 2018, a wildfire caught in the area and it exposed like dozens of ceremonial sites and burials and things that settlers wouldn't have known about before. And the Lakota weren't consulted when it came to Mount Rushmore, obviously. And part of the issue with that is that with these treaties, a lot of times the Indigenous people that are involved with it are saying, well, that leader doesn't speak for me, because there's different bands. A lot of time there's people that live in different areas. That's why one of the treaties ended up being signed and ratified by people who were part of the land claims at that point. And the other people said that leader doesn't speak for me. That's kind of what's happening with the Crazy Horse Monument that's in the Black Hills. The people that are doing it are not working on everybody's consent at the same time. Really, the only thing that works on everybody's consent is the Black Hills being the Black Hills. And there's something to be said about people that don't want it to be there, even though it was I think it's originally an Indigenous-led thing. I'm going to have to look this up for the next time. But I think it's Indigenous-led, that sculpture. But still, those people don't speak for all of the Lakota. And from what I've heard from most of the people that I've been in touch with, they'd rather the Black Hills just get to stay the Black Hills without carving more scars into them.
See, now I know something that I didn't know, and that helps my opinion into a more positive light. I just thought it looked cool from what I saw.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And now I understand better.
Okay. Any more questions? I mean, I've only been talking for an hour.
I've always been interested in Tuscaloosa, Chief Tuscaloosa. That they write about during the Soto's expeditions or whatever. Apparently they came across him, and even the Spanish explorers were writing about his imposing stature and fearlessness in the face of those dainty little horse charges that they would do, where they'd like lead up to somebody and then pull back at the last minute to watch how they reacted. They said Tuscaloosa was fearless.
That's old style, man. We have something called counting coup. A lot of Plains tribes. I have 2 Plains tribes in my family. Counting coup is basically where you run up to your enemy and you touch them without killing them, and you're able to escape without injury. And that's so if you see a staff with lots of eagle feathers on it, that's called a coup stick. That's how many times you've counted coup on an enemy. Not necessarily killing them is the worst thing. Sometimes it's embarrassing the hell out of them.
It's like a flex boop.
Basically, yeah.
That's fucking rad as hell.
They just went up and were like, God.
It's basically like, so I know that I watched the feed from the Rushmore protest that happened at the beginning of the month. There was basically a coup counted there. You could hear everybody kind of whooping about it afterwards because somebody, one of the protesters who was on the front line against the police who were in front of them, reached over and touched one of the police with a coup stick. And it's basically like, look, I can do this to you. I can do this. I haven't hurt you. I haven't killed you, but I'm close enough to do it.
I'm choosing not to kill you.
Basically.
But I could.
Yeah.
And you know that now. That's tight as hell.
Yeah. It's not always about, maiming and destruction. Sometimes it's just telling them, look, I can, I'm not.
It kind of reminds me of the flower wars from, Mesoamerican history there. The same kind of idea where it's all about like turning war into a kind of game to make it less lethal, but still about, exercising those urges or whatever. They say that's what sport is to war as porn is to sex. It's like some kind of like thing that we all need to get out to express like that kind of side taking in group, out group.
I mean, that's basically the story of I think the founding of the Aztecs, like the beginning of the Aztec creation story is a war game, basically. So I mean, there's a lot of precedent. There's a lot of history behind these kind of things. It's one of the things that I enjoy about discussing this kind of history is that, yes, there's a lot of differences between Asian history and European history and African history and North American history and South American history. There's so many differences between them, but there are some constants that you keep finding. And there's more in the constants than there should be in the differences, unless somebody goes nuts and decides to kill off an entire race for tobacco and cotton. But I saw that look.
Oops.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier, speaking on that, about, I think you said the Creeks were monotheistic, and I did not know that they were monotheistic. Are there a lot of indigenous religions that are monotheistic, or is it, or is it just being polytheistic? Just I guess is my misconception.
I'm going to admit that I found that fact by reading somebody else without going very deep into it. But from what I know, I would hazard a guess that at that point, because they were talking about this like 200 years after colonization had started, and a lot of the southeastern tribes did take on a lot of the mantles of the settlers. And so you see this a lot with colonized people, is that they'll take on some parts of it to make them more palatable to the colonizers, but maybe not necessarily all of it. I would guess that might have happened. I'm not entirely sure. I could be completely wrong, but there's a lot of religious differences, I guess, across the continent. A lot of times what you'll find is a idea of a creator it's really hard describing with English. Like, I'm not going to be any better at it with Mohawk, but with English words, there's so much subtext to every word that you're not going to get the exact idea across. But you're going to have a creator who pretty much put a start to life, kind of a deist position, that the creator started it. It didn't necessarily keep doing things beyond that. And a lot of it tends to be the idea of spirits, or kind of the idea that a spirit is inhabiting an animal or a person or a feeling. A spirit can give you a feeling. That's basically where I come from. Like the Mohawk side is, you have an idea of a creator, but you're mostly going to be influenced by spirits. You're going to be influenced to change your way of thinking. You're going to be influenced to understand part of creation through that way. But honestly, a lot of them, indigenous religions were basically outlawed for a couple hundred years. So when people are trying to reclaim them, there's not a lot of people that you can go to and say, hey, can you give me the complete rundown of this religion? Because it had to be rarely passed down. It had to be passed down to people who would survive. And a lot of people were not passing it down because they could be arrested. They could have their children taken away. They could have their homes taken away for practicing these things. That happened a lot in the Northwest area with the potlatch. They specifically, I think this is Canadian history, but for Indigenous people, like there's not a difference. It's all the same continent. So with the potlatch, their entire religion was outlawed. So they came up with the idea of having parties. So a party, you can't stop somebody from having a party, right? And it was basically secretly having religious meetings through the guise of having this gathering party that makes sense to the settlers. So in that way, a lot of the religions are very like kind of hushed and quieted. I don't think there's any way that I could know exactly what the religion was like 500 years ago at this point, but you're just trying to grasp threads. So this is a thread that I recognize and I can hold on to it or whatever at that point.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I get that.
Anything else?
I was about to say anything else, y'all, before it's getting late. We've been talking for a bit, and we have part 2 to look forward to now.
Yeah, I can't wait to
so
discuss. I'm going to pick up some really good questions on history and sources and.
Will's gonna dive deep, and like no one's gonna know what the fuck he's talking about except Will. So it's gonna.
No, but I feel like Kiaza's gonna know exactly what he's talking
It's just gonna be a conversation between.
He's gonna be like, oh yeah, totally.
Look, I never even went to college. I got 1 year of psychology underneath my belt, and I had to learn about treaty history, about the history of migration across the continent and everything. This has all had to be self-guided. So if I'm wrong about something, it's my own fault, but I also had to find all of it out by myself. So...
Fuck yeah.
Thank you for talking with us tonight. I mean, this has been eye-opening, and I love this episode.
This has been really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, next time maybe I won't stumble over my words as often, but I've been gunning for a position for, you're all going to be party to this now. I want to come back in November because November is Indigenous Hell Month. And I got a lot to talk about then because you've got Halloween at the end of October, you've got Canadian Thanksgiving in October, you've got American Thanksgiving in November, and it's Native American History Month in November. So I'm gonna have a ton.
I say in November we do a rehash of our first episode.
That's the second.
I swear I will sit down and write about all the times that y'all just went, damn, that's messed up. Like that's commentary.
Yeah, I remember when I went up to Horseshoe Bend, I was like walking around, like, God damn! I was like listening to the phone guided tour thing. I was like, oh my God, this is not what they taught us in school. This is so fucked.
Damn, that's messed up.
I just remember like that was our first episode. I've gone from White Claw to white wine. Oh, how
Proud of you, buddy.
Oh, how we've grown.
That's called success.
No, there's nothing about any of this that's successful.
Those Soros checks have been hitting, I tell you what.
I hope they extend them.
I met a person who like overheard a friend of mine like at a protest like asking about the podcast, and they turned around and they were just like, are you Comrade Kate? And I was like, what? And he was like, are you Kate from Dixieland of the Proletariat? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, oh my God, I listen to you guys all the time. And I blurted out, why?
Oh my God.
Yeah, this podcast, like if it wasn't for our guests, we would be ass.
Oh my god.
Okay, just speak for everyone there.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. I appreciate it.
I feel like I'm exempt from that since I started as a guest. So.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work for those first 2 episodes. Like, I'm really
y'all. If I'm ass, it's y'all's fault. You converted me to ass.
When I say that we're ass, I'm referring to Nelson.
I'm an affirmative action hire, so
Me too.
I have to be here for the numbers. So
we wouldn't get that tax credit if it wasn't for Kate and Tommy.
Yeah, either Tommy or I have to be present on every episode. Otherwise, it's just 3 straight white guys.
I've already given Nelson hell about this.
Like the first 7 episodes.
If it wasn't for Kate and Tommy, we'd just be Come Town.
Like a more educated Come Town, I would hope.
Anyway, let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
I was gonna say now that you have had an Indigenous person on here, people are gonna come up to you and ask like, "Are you tax exempt now?" Like that's gonna be the big thing. So
Probably asking about casinos is like, oh my god.
I was actually going to ask about that. Are we tax exempt?
Yeah.
Okay.
All fair.
Yeah, but that hard profit we're fucking doing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, oh
I
my
was gonna say,
God.
wait, y'all make money off this podcast?
Breaking in those podcasts, man.
So much
Podcasting
money.
is so lucrative.
Dude, those
God.
$20, man. Ugh.
I wonder
That's
what
why-
I always
you did
thought that
divide
my
up.
first cookbook would make a bunch of money.
You've made like
I
$100.
got your cookbook, damn it! I'm one of the people that have funded that.
Have you made anything from it yet?
Yeah, I think we made like $60-$80 off the cookbook.
Not money. I was asking guys
You
if she
fucking
cooked after the
capitalist
fucking
bitch.
recipe.
God
Capitalist
damn.
fuckwad.
Jesus.
You want me to rip on Nelson? Okay.
You Jeff
He
Bezos
sent-
over here?
He sent me the cookbook.
fuck?
I'm like, oh, this is great. I decided to go read it. And I was telling him about like these jokes that are in the cookbook. And he's like, oh, I hadn't read it. Like, man, you just sent it to me. You haven't even
Tyler
read it?
and I worked so hard on that. Like
Let's be
Tyler,
honest. I did most of that drunk like I do most of these podcasts.
you should see the original notes because like I edited the whole thing and it was like, you know, to make
When
it
I
like
sent that shit to you, I felt like I was back in high school sending my essays to my mom.
that's kind of what it was like because it was like making sure that everything like had like a congruent structure all the way through it, but also like not wanting to take Tyler's voice out of it because like that is the charm is like don't fucking put sugar in your grits and then just randomly throwing the word comrade into like every step of an entire recipe. Yeah, it's just like yeah, but it's like we worked really hard on that, but also
Hey, I want to make
like
I want to make an announcement on not the next entry, but the entry after that. It's gonna be Ye Halal.
Will
just smiled so hard.
By the way, Tyler, grapefruit bars totally fucking worked. It was delicious.
Wait, what?
Never mind. You didn't read your fucking messages.
To complete the lining of our night with some al curry.
What?
What, Will? You froze. You had to be outside
Set the
smoking
calm down.
your Newport. What'd you say?
I said that we're going to dissolve the lining of our stomach with some Southern style curry.
Yes.
Sounds great.
Oh my God. All right, y'all. Is there anything else? Any other questions? We good? All righty. At Dixieland, the proletariat, we believe the South will rise again, but for this time for the right reasons, those being worker-owned means of production, decolonization, and self-determination for all oppressed peoples. We are please follow us on social media at Dixie Pro, and we are coming to you from the birthplace of the civil rights movement, Montgomery, Alabama, and the Bluff City, Memphis, Tennessee. We also would like to recognize that we're recording on occupied land that rightfully belongs to the Muskogee and Chickasaw nations. Thank you, Kiaza, for coming on the podcast. It's been great. We can't wait to have you on for part 2.
It's Kiaza, but thank you.
I knew I was going to fuck it up.
You call me Kai.
Wow.
For
Just like white
fuck's
people.
sake.
Just to fuck up.
Okay, so remember like
people.
right when we
Jesus
logged in
Christ.
and I asked you how to pronounce your
Spaghetti
name?
eating prick.
I told him I was going to send him a voice memo on how to pronounce my name.
Jesus.
right.
Just like white people.
I've
Anyway.
been Kate. This has been Tommy, Tyler, William, and Nielsen. Thank you so much.
I hate all of you.
Well, good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.
Jesus.
We'll
Fuck
see y'all
you.
next time.
Creek already did rise.
Yep. Nelson's gonna fuck up some black people's names next episode.
Whatever you say.
See y'all later. Thank you, Kiaza.
Good night.
Fucking bye.